You have been lied to for a century and a half. What if the famous Eiffel Tower was never actually built? How could thousands of metal parts be manufactured across different regions without a unified measurement system? Where did the gardener, who spent his life tending flowers, get the knowledge to design an engineering marvel? Why did cities around the world burn in fires at temperatures that trees' combustion can't reach? And why was everything that could reveal the truth systematically destroyed by fire? In this episode, we'll delve into the technological absurdity of the 19th century, expose the secrets behind the energy conspiracy, and uncover who truly inhabited our cities before the Great Reset. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new investigations. Ahead lies a perspective that will make you see the great structures of the past in a whole new light. Have you ever wondered why ancient buildings evoke a strange sense of dissonance? Giant metal portals where humans appear as tiny as ants. Ornate castings so intricate that even modern factories struggle to replicate them. And yet, we're told this was the era of candles and kerosene lamps, a time when the main tools were pickaxes and the primary mode of transport was a horse-drawn cart. That's when, supposedly, humanity suddenly learned to melt thousands of tons of perfect metal and erect structures with millimeter precision. Today, we will uncover the cynical lie that underpins your understanding of history. Subscribe to the channel to learn the truth that has been hidden from you since your very first lesson. Let's start with what's right beneath your feet. Right now, go outside into the Old Town Square. Moscow, St. Petersburg, Prague, Paris, London. It doesn't matter. Find any building claimed to have been constructed in the 18th or 19th century. Approach the wall. Look at the ground level. Do you see arched openings, half buried in the pavement? These are not decorative facade elements. They are real windows. Fully functional window openings with frames, sills, and carved casings. Only they descend into the ground by a meter, 2, sometimes 3. Imagine the absurdity of this situation. An architect spends huge sums on beautiful windows, embellishes them with stucco, installs expensive glass, and then buries this splendor in the earth up to the arch. Why? What's the point? Official science vaguely mumbles about a cultural layer. They say debris and dirt accumulated over centuries, and the ground level gradually rose. Anyone with a functioning brain would immediately ask, how can the ground rise 3 or 4 meters in just 100 or 200 years? Do residents of wealthy homes watch as their mansion's windows slowly sink into the dirt, depriving the rooms of light? And no one cleans this dirt? Instead, they move the entrance doors to what was once the second floor? It sounds insane, because it is insanity. The cultural layer does exist as a phenomenon, but it grows by millimeters over centuries, not meters over decades. Especially in the central districts of imperial capitals, where streets were once kept spotless by an iron hand, every cobblestone meticulously accounted for. Dirt couldn't accumulate unchecked in places where imperial carriages rolled by. And yet, what do we see today? In Moscow, Prague, Paris, London, it's the same story everywhere. Entire floors buried beneath the earth. And these aren't damp basements for storing coal. These are full-fledged chambers with high ceilings, elegant doorways, and decorative window niches. Once upon a time, life thrived here. People traded, worked, and raised families. Now, all of it is buried under meters of soil, layers of earth that appeared out of nowhere. The most frightening part is the scale of this phenomenon. Sunken buildings are found on every continent simultaneously. In America, Europe, Russia, Asia, even Australia. Everywhere, the picture is eerily identical, as if, in a single moment in history, a wave of liquid clay swept across the planet, hardening into a shell that buried the lower floors of a previous civilization. When did this happen? All evidence points to the mid-18th to early 19th century. It is after this period that strange activity begins. Cities suddenly appear on maps, not as new settlements founded by colonists, but as fully formed entities, as if they had been unearthed from the ground itself. From beneath layers of dried mud, spires of cathedrals, fragments of walls, and metal structures protrude. These are cleaned, repaired, and new glass panes are inserted into surviving frames, then proudly proclaimed as modern engineering achievements. Open any photo archive from that era. Mid-19th century city photographs are strikingly vacant. Vast avenues without a single pedestrian. Squares designed for tens of thousands of people, completely deserted. Where have all the city dwellers gone? Historians uniformly cling to the familiar excuse about the limitations of early photography. Long exposures couldn't capture moving people. But this explanation falls apart at the first close look. If movement prevented people from being recorded, why then are the branches of trees swaying in the wind clearly visible in the same photos? Why are the horses hitched to carriages sharp and distinct, not blurred? Why do shadows from buildings fall at different angles, as if several hours passed between shots? There is only one explanation, and it's terrifying. The cities were truly abandoned. Their original builders vanished, and those rare figures of people captured in the images are the new inhabitants, those who came to occupy the ruins after the catastrophe. Examine their clothing, their poses, their facial expressions carefully. They don't look like the original residents confidently walking their streets. They appear as visitors, encountering a place that clearly wasn't meant for beings of their size and capabilities. Now, let's turn to specific structures that were supposed to be the pinnacle of 19th century engineering. Take Paris's iconic symbol, the tower. We're told it was built in less than 2.5 years. The total weight of its metal framework exceeds 7,000 tons. A tower assembled from nearly 20,000 individual components. All held together, brace yourself, by 2.5 million rivets. Just think about that number. Millions of rivets. Each one had to be heated until glowing red, inserted into a hole in seconds before the metal cooled, and then flattened with precise hammer blows. In the wind, at dizzying heights of up to 300 meters, on shaky scaffolding. Try to imagine this hellish labor. A worker balances on a narrow platform, gusts of wind sway the structure. In his hands, a piece of glowing hot metal that cools in mere moments. And he must hit the hole exactly, with pinpoint accuracy, missing by not a millimeter. A miss means a defect, and the entire operation must be restarted. And there are millions of such operations, all supposedly completed in just 2 years. But that's only the beginning of the absurdity. The metal for the tower was produced by an archaic puddling process. The essence of the method is this. Molten cast iron is manually stirred in a furnace with long iron bars, burning out excess carbon. The furnace temperature reaches 1,500 degrees Celsius. The work is so grueling that only the most resilient men could endure it, and only for a short time. The process is painfully slow, demanding superhuman effort. And most importantly, with such a primitive method, it's physically impossible to produce a uniform material. Each new batch of iron would differ in chemical composition, impurity levels, and strength. A tower made from such heterogeneous metal would be unpredictable. Some parts stronger, others weaker, with different thermal expansion rates. Such a structure would inevitably develop cracks and deform within the first decades. But what do we see? The tower stands for over a century, enduring hurricane-force winds, snow loads, temperature fluctuations, as if the entire structure were made from perfectly homogeneous material with precisely calibrated properties. Now, let's talk about the calculations that should have preceded the construction. All the rivet holes were drilled beforehand, on the ground, in factory conditions. This only means one thing. Engineers had to calculate the exact position of every single one of the 20,000 parts, with accuracy down to fractions of a millimeter. Without computers, without 3D modeling software, without laser measuring devices. Just paper, pencils, and logarithmic rulers. Under such conditions, the probability of error approaches absolute inevitability. The parts simply could not have fit together during assembly. The process would have turned into an endless nightmare of constant fitting, drilling new holes on site, reworking, and defects. The construction site would have drowned in mountains of metal shavings and defective components. But what do the photos of the construction process show? An entirely different picture. Massive prefabricated blocks are delivered to the site, lifted with primitive cranes and simply joined together. Without fuss, without crowds of workers with files and drills. Everything unfolds surprisingly smoothly and swiftly, as if children are assembling a toy set, where every piece fits perfectly from the start. Now, let's turn to the economic side of the project. France at the end of the 19th century was still recovering from war losses and economic upheavals. The national budget was strained to the breaking point, and in such a situation, the government makes the decision to spend colossal sums on a massive metal structure that serves no practical purpose. It's not a defensive fortification, not an industrial facility, not a transportation hub, just a decorative tower for a temporary exhibition. 7,000 tons of strategically vital metal, metal that could have been used to produce rails, build ships, or manufacture weapons, are all diverted to this pointless construction. Where is the economic logic? The only reasonable explanation is that the metal was practically free. It wasn't produced in factory furnaces consuming tons of coal and ore. It was found ready-made. Remnants of structural elements left over from a previous, more advanced civilization. They were simply reassembled from preserved fragments, passing off the result as a triumph of modern engineering. Now, let's cross the English Channel to London. The Crystal Palace, an edifice supposedly built in just a few months specifically for the world's industrial exhibition. Think about the scale. The building covers over 90,000 square meters. Its length exceeds half a kilometer. Its height is comparable to a 10-story building. The entire framework is made of cast iron, with walls and roof of glass, 300,000 glass panels. In an era when glass was blown manually, each sheet unique in size, thickness, and quality, we are asked to believe that within a few months, an army of glassmakers produced 300,000 standardized panels of identical dimensions. Without modern furnaces, without automation, without conveyor belts, just master craftsmen working day and night without pause. Do the math. How many thousands of glaziers would have had to work simultaneously to meet such a deadline? But the real intrigue of this story lies elsewhere. The project's architect is Joseph Paxton, a gardener by profession, a man who spent his entire conscious life cultivating flowers in greenhouses and designing plant conservatories. And suddenly, this gardener creates an engineering marvel that demands profound knowledge of material resistance, structural mechanics, aerodynamics, and thermodynamics. He performs complex calculations of loads from snow, wind forces, thermal expansion of metal and glass. Did this gardener master all that engineering science between watering roses and pruning bushes? And now, about the metal itself. 4,500 tons of cast iron and iron. To produce such an amount, tens of thousands of tons of iron ore are needed. Gigantic blast furnaces operating non-stop for months. Mountains of coal to sustain the monstrous melting temperatures. Where are the traces of this massive construction? Where are the quarries from which the ore was mined? Where are the slag heaps inevitably left behind after smelting by the ton? They simply do not exist. Nothing of the sort appears in any historical records. It's as if the metal materialized out of thin air. Transporting the materials is a story in itself, worth paying close attention to. Imagine the scene. Thousands of loaded carts slowly crawling along muddy roads across England. Each one carries iron beams weighing hundreds of kilograms. Horses stumble in the muddy ruts. Carriages tip over on potholes. This should have caused an unprecedented transportation crisis. The capital of the empire, London, should have been gridlocked for months. Newspapers would have been flooded with angry letters from citizens complaining about the impossibility of getting around the city. But when we check the archives of period newspapers from that era, there is complete silence. Not a single word about problems with delivering construction materials. No complaints from the drivers. No reports from traffic jams. The palace appeared quietly and unobtrusively, as if it had simply been unearthed from the ground and put into order. Look at the photographs of the details of the Crystal Palace. The quality of the craftsmanship definitively puts an end to this story. This is not rough, handmade forging. We are looking at artistic casting of the highest level, with delicate ornaments, elegant scrolls, and complex geometric patterns. And each such detail was repeated hundreds of times with absolute, mathematical precision. Today, achieving such perfection requires CNC machines, computer-aided design, and laser quality control. But in the mid-19th century, different factories in different cities, different craftsmen manually cast these elements. Each factory had its own traditions, its own masters, its own methods, its own measures of length and weight. And yet, all the parts fit together perfectly during assembly, without gaps, without filing or adjustments. The only logical explanation is that there was a single, high-tech manufacturing complex with strict quality standards and precise equipment. But such a complex does not exist in official history. The end of the Crystal Palace story also raises serious suspicions. In 1936, this grand building was completely destroyed by fire, entirely, down to the ground. A structure made of iron, cast iron, and glass. Think about it. Cast iron melts at around 1200 degrees Celsius. Glass melts at about 1400 to 1600 degrees. A typical fire, even a very intense one, reaches a maximum temperature of around 700 to 800 degrees. Where did the heat come from to melt the metal structures? There was very little wood inside the building, hardly enough to sustain such a blaze. Yet, the metal framework melted into a liquid mass. This could only happen with the use of special thermite compounds or targeted high-temperature methods. It looks like a deliberate, carefully planned destruction of evidence, an attempt to prevent anyone from conducting a detailed analysis of the metal, determine their true age, chemical composition, and uncover the manufacturing technologies. You might say, all right, maybe there's really something wrong with these buildings. But where did the resources for such massive construction projects even come from? Who worked on all these mythical structures? Let's take a close look at the people of that era. Demographic data paints a remarkably strange picture. At the beginning of the 19th century, Europe and America were relatively sparsely populated regions. Then suddenly, within just a few decades, there's an explosive surge in population growth. The numbers increase against all odds, despite cholera and plague outbreaks, endless wars, and appalling sanitation in cities. The growth charts soar almost vertically. From a biological standpoint, this is utterly impossible. People don't reproduce at such a rate without radical improvements in living conditions, medicine, and nutrition. Yet, conditions were actually deteriorating rapidly. Cities overcrowded, diseases wiping out thousands, medicine remaining primitive. Pay close attention to the age structure of the population at that time. Elderly people, seniors, are catastrophically few, almost non-existent. Meanwhile, children and teenagers, an enormous, incredible number. Entire armies of orphaned children and homeless youth. In America, a large-scale program of so-called orphan trains was launched. Hundreds of thousands of children without parents were shipped westward, handed over to farmers as free labor. In Europe, children worked en masse in coal mines, as chimney sweeps, in textile factories. Where did this monstrous number of orphan children come from? and simultaneously across the entire world in one historical period? What happened to their fathers and mothers? Pandemics couldn't have selectively wiped out only adults, leaving children alive. Wars also don't explain the scale of this phenomenon. The only explanation left is a global catastrophe, a rapid, sudden event that destroyed most of the adult population. The children, more resilient and adaptable, survived. They were gathered, transported to abandoned cities, and used as a resource to rebuild civilization. Moreover, at the end of the 19th century, world fairs featured a popular attraction: pavilions with infants in incubators. Huge halls filled with rows of glass boxes, each holding a newborn. Visitors paid to see this spectacle. Officially, it was presented as a medical breakthrough, saving premature babies with the latest technology. But then, why weren't hospitals using these marvelous incubators? Why did this technology only appear at fairs and exhibitions? And the main question, where did so many infants without mothers come from? There's a theory that after a global catastrophe, the new authorities launched a program of artificial population recovery. Children were raised in incubators as biological material, as a resource. They were then distributed across cities and farms, factories. They were given new names, a fabricated history, a false memory. And these children became the foundation of a new post-apocalyptic civilization that knows absolutely nothing about the true past. The energy component of this story also doesn't add up at all. Metal production requires an enormous amount of fuel. To smelt 1 ton of pig iron, you need to burn 2 to 3 tons of high-quality coal or charcoal. Multiply that by thousands of tons of metal supposedly used for towers, palaces, countless stations, bridges, and railways. The result is millions of tons of fuel. Europe's forests should have been completely wiped out, cut down to the roots for charcoal production. The coal mines should have been operating at maximum capacity, spewing tons of coal to the surface every day. But when we look at historical forestry maps, the forests are still in place. No signs of total deforestation. Checking the coal mining statistics, the volumes don't come close to the claimed industrial needs. The energy supposedly used for metal smelting appears to have come from nowhere. Or, more likely, it wasn't used at all, because the metals weren't melted in furnaces. They were already processed, stored in warehouses of a fallen civilization. These technical details finally and irrevocably undermine the official version of history. Let's consider the issue of standardization in manufacturing. In the 19th century, each country, each region, almost every city had its own measures of length and weight. English inches differed from French inches. Feet varied as well. Even the metric system was interpreted differently in different places. The threading on bolts and nuts was unique to each craftsman. Try screwing a Soviet-made bolt into a modern imported nut today. It won't fit. The threads don't match. And we're asked to believe that, amid complete chaos of measurements and standards, enormous structures were assembled from parts made in different parts of the country, and everything fit perfectly? With no gaps or mismatches? That's only possible with a single, tightly controlled system of standards and high-precision measuring equipment, which, by definition, could not have existed in that era. Or take the molds used for artistic casting. To produce thousands of identical decorative details, you need master models, a huge amount of molding equipment, boxes, containers, templates, literally mountains of specialized tools. Where is all of this? In industrial museums, visitors are shown a couple of wooden frames and told with seriousness, these are the tools used for everything. But to produce on the claimed scale, entire hangars filled to the ceiling with molds and equipment would be necessary. Nothing of the sort exists, and it never has. Either these details weren't cast in the 19th century at all, or they were made using technologies that we are categorically not told about. World's fairs are a whole other incredibly revealing topic. London, Paris, Chicago, Philadelphia, St. Louis. Everywhere follows the exact same pattern of events. Within a year or a year and a half, massive architectural complexes are erected from stone, metal, and glass. Officially, all of this is declared to be temporary pavilions made from cheap materials: plaster, wood, stucco. After the exhibition closes, everything is supposed to be dismantled. But take a close look at the photos of the ruins after fires and demolitions. From the debris, thick steel reinforcement protrudes. Massive brick walls are visible. Deeply laid foundations can be seen. These are by no means temporary decorative huts. They are real, solid structures, built to last for centuries. Why would they construct such buildings for just a few months of exhibition work, only to destroy them afterward? From an economic standpoint, it's pure madness. Completely inexplicable expenses. A more logical scenario suggests that authorities found surviving structures after a global catastrophe. They fenced off the area with a tall barrier, hung a beautiful sign reading "World's Fair," and showcased it to the gawking public. Then, after the official closing, they systematically burned or blew up these buildings to prevent detailed inspection of their construction and to avoid uncomfortable questions. The Chicago World's Fair of 1893 is a perfect, textbook example of such an operation. A white city sprawling over 300 hectares. Hundreds of majestic buildings with domes, colonnades, fountain complexes. Fully functional electric lighting across the entire site. Moving walkways, trams, transporting visitors. An intricate system of water channels and supply networks. All of this supposedly built in just 2 years from plaster and wooden frameworks. And immediately after the fair closed, a mysterious fire destroyed almost everything down to the foundations. How convenient. No buildings, no possibility of independent expertise, no way to determine the true age of the materials, no chance to uncover contradictions with the official historical narrative. Now, let's look at these metal structures with entirely different eyes. What if they weren't just decorative buildings or useless monuments? Let's analyze them from an engineer's perspective. The Eiffel Tower is an ideal giant antenna. Its intricate metal lattice reaches 300 meters into the sky. A powerful grounding system extends deep into the earth, hiding extensive technical chambers. The sharp spire at the top is a classic lightning rod. The Crystal Palace in London is a massive resonator and capacitor. Its glass dome, with a specific geometric shape, and the metal framework of precisely calculated configuration, everything strongly suggests a device designed to collect and store atmospheric electricity. Free energy directly from the air, accessible to every single inhabitant. There is a well-founded scientific theory that all such structures from the 19th century were part of a single global energy network on a planetary scale. Tall towers collected electrical charge directly from the ionosphere. Domes and vaults functioned as giant capacitors, energy storage units. Extensive underground chambers, now buried or flooded, house distribution equipment and transformers. Power was transmitted wirelessly through the ether directly to consumers. No meters, no monthly bills to energy companies. Just plug your device into any point in the city and it would operate, drawing energy from the air itself. But for the new rulers of the post-catastrophe world, such a system was utterly unwelcome. Free energy accessible to everyone would make people independent and free. The ruling elites, however, needed obedient slaves, completely dependent on coal, oil, gas, and electricity, all of which had to be paid for. That's why the old etheric infrastructure was systematically dismantled worldwide. The Crystal Palace was burned under suspicious circumstances. Exhibition pavilions were demolished under the pretext of temporary structures. The internal equipment of towers and domes was dismantled. The remaining empty metal frameworks were declared architectural monuments and engineering achievements. Nikola Tesla almost certainly knew about these ancient technologies. Perhaps he saw functioning energy stations in his childhood or youth. Or he discovered preserved technical drawings and descriptions. He attempted to restore the lost wireless energy transmission system through his Wardenclyffe Tower. and he was immediately stopped by the financial elites. John Pierpont Morgan and other magnates personally cut off funding. Laboratories were shut down, equipment confiscated. Tesla himself was declared a semi-mad dreamer, and after his death, his documents and diaries were promptly seized by intelligence agencies and classified. Because the ruling circles had no interest in free energy for the common people, they needed total control through energy dependence. The last, most ominous question of this entire story remains: if all the greatness of the 19th century was not built by us, if a global catastrophe destroyed a previous highly advanced civilization, then where did the new people come from to repopulate the abandoned cities? Carefully examine old photographs. Everywhere, crowds of children and teenagers, young people, almost no elderly or old people, those who could personally remember what things were really like before the catastrophe. They either perished during the very cataclysm or were systematically isolated afterward. The 19th century was also the era of mass discovery of psychiatric hospitals around the world. Those institutions imprisoned inconvenient individuals, people who retained memories of the old world, those who outright refused to accept the new, imposed version of history. They were declared mentally ill, dangerous lunatics, and locked away for life. Meanwhile, children were raised anew, almost from scratch. Exhibitions featuring incubators are not a triumph of medical science. They are a public display of existing biological resources. Hundreds of thousands of infants, without parents or a past, were handed out to farmers, breeders, and foster families. They were taught a new language, a new religion, and fed a fabricated history. People were told that the majestic buildings surrounding them were constructed by their noble ancestors using only pickaxes and carts. And these children, raised in artificially created environments, never questioned the dangerous stories fed to them. They obediently became factory workers, soldiers, compliant taxpayers, and consumers of expensive energy. We are the direct descendants of those deceived children. We live in cities that our true ancestors never built. We walk streets designed and laid out by others. Every day we rely on the remnants of technologies whose true workings have long been forgotten and are now hopelessly obsolete. We've been fed a distorted, truncated history, told from childhood that humanity supposedly descended from wild apes and gradually evolved from stone tools to space shuttles. But the real truth is entirely different. We are the degenerate, fallen offspring of a once great and powerful civilization. Or, worse still, we are simply newcomers, settlers who took over other people's homes and cities after a global catastrophe wiped out the true masters of the land. The dates marking the deliberate erasure of the Old World's traces are strikingly precise. In 1812, Moscow was engulfed in a massive fire, reducing 3/4 of the city to ashes. In 1814, the U.S. Capitol, Washington, D.C., burned. The White House and Capitol lay in ruins. In 1835, New York was consumed by flames. In 1942, Hamburg was razed to the ground. In 1771, Chicago was wiped off the map entirely. In 1906, San Francisco was destroyed by fire. Each blaze was of such unimaginable intensity and temperature that stone and granite melted. Ordinary fires, even very fierce ones, cannot do that. Granite cannot flow like wax at 800 degrees. It requires at least 1,200, preferably 1,500 degrees Celsius. These are not natural disasters or accidents. They are systematic, methodical cleanings of territories. Total destruction of the physical remnants of the pre-ancient world and its incredible technologies. On the smoldering ruins, our modern world was built. A world of choking soot and black oil. A world of expensive, finite energy and relentless ecological disasters. Primitive, inefficient internal combustion engines replaced sophisticated ether generators. Economic slavery replaced technological freedom. Today, the Eiffel Tower stands as a majestic monument over the grave of a fallen great civilization. Millions of tourists snap endless selfies in front of it every day, unaware of the chilling truth behind the facade. This intricate structure, made of thousands of tons of metal, could have powered the entire city of Paris completely for free. If only someone on the planet still remembered where the main switch was or how to activate this ancient system. Evidence of its existence is scattered all around us. Gigantic doors 6 to 8 meters tall, impossible for an average person to pass without a ladder. Window openings starting at unreachable heights, 3 meters above modern floor level. Monolithic staircases with steps that are awkwardly designed for the feet of an average-sized human. Polygonal masonry built from massive stone blocks, perfectly fitted together without a single drop of mortar. Metal structures that have resisted corrosion and rust for over 2 centuries. Star-shaped fortresses, all identical in geometric form, located on completely different, distant continents. A unified architectural style and construction techniques stretching from St. Petersburg to Buenos Aires. All of this screams loudly to any observant person. Someone lived and created here. Someone vastly more technologically advanced. And the material traces of their presence have been painstakingly, systematically erased from the face of the earth. The scale of this historical falsification is so enormous that an ordinary person simply cannot grasp or accept it. The entire world history has been rewritten. All irrefutable physical evidence has been physically destroyed. A carefully crafted illusion of continuous human progress has been implanted into the collective consciousness. A narrative from primitive cave dwellers wielding sticks to modern smartphones. But the reality is completely opposite. We are not advancing. We are rapidly degenerating and losing knowledge. We no longer know how to build structures that stand for 300 years without repairs. We cannot reproduce the quality and durability of metals from a century ago. Technologies and knowledge once commonplace and familiar to our ancestors have been irretrievably lost. I am not trying to impose my point of view on you. I don't aim to prove that I am right and everyone else is mistaken. My task is much simpler and more honest. I simply present the facts. I raise questions that make official science uncomfortable. What you do with this information is entirely your personal choice. I am just opening the door. You decide whether to step inside or stay on the threshold. Seek the truth on your own. Don't believe my words or those of academic historians blindly. Investigate. Dig deeper. Look at the world around you from different angles, from unexpected perspectives. Subscribe. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you won't miss new investigations. There are many more mysteries and discoveries ahead. We will continue to find clues, ask uncomfortable questions, explore what official science tends to overlook. Because the truth is always nearby. All it takes is the desire to see her.